Welcome to Syncreate, a show where we explore the intersections between creativity, psychology, and spirituality. We believe everyone has the capacity to be creative. And our goal is to demystify the creative process and expand the boundaries of what it means to be creative. I'm Melinda Rothaus, and I help individuals and organizations bring their creative dreams and visions to life.
And I'm Charlotte Gulick. I'm a writer, educator, and writing coach. We are the co-authors of a book on the creative process, also called Syncreate.
Hey everyone, we're back for another Creative Spark episode. And today we're going to be talking about the journey into the creative wilderness. So, as you probably know, if you've ever engaged in any sort of creative work, it's not all, roses and butterflies all the time. It might start that way, like any good romance, with flashes of inspiration and insight and all of these kinds of things. And we have an idea and we're excited about it and we start working on it. And then almost inevitably, I've learned, especially when working on a longer work, we somehow, fall into the abyss, which can look like, why did I ever start this? Who am I to do this project? I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know how to move forward. I'm not qualified to do this. All the doubts creeping up. And what I've come to understand is that this is actually part of the process. It's part of the journey. We are embarking in creative work on something that's never been done before. There's no map. So it's a bit like the hero's journey, right? And from Joseph Campbell's work, where we hear this call, we often resist the call to adventure, and then if we finally do heed the call, then we're going into the forest, and we don't know what we're going to find there, and we might find helpers and guides, but we might find adversaries and monsters and all the things that live in the dark. And metaphorically speaking, those are some of those voices of self-doubt, right? Or we just fall into a creative funk, or we get stuck, or whatever that is. And so just knowing that that's probably going to happen on some level or another, maybe not so dramatic, but on some level, and that actually we kind of have to go there from a Jungian perspective. It's like we have to go down into the darkness, into the depths, in order to fully come to understand what the work is and what it's about. And also that it's not just about our ego, that there's something more, that wants to come forward beyond maybe what we can see beforehand. And so kind of surrendering to that often allows the work to kind of mature and develop in a way beyond what we could have possibly imagined. And an example that comes to mind, I recently watched the documentary about Anthony Bourdain and how, he just came up in New York City, worked his way up from being a dishwasher to like line cook and eventually a chef. And then turns out he was a good writer and he wrote a book and it did really well. And then he got approached by some people who wanted to do a show with him, and he didn't know anything about TV. And at first he was terrible at it and awkward and shy and all these kind of things. And then, somewhere along the way, he kind of like got the hang of it and like started to make it his own. And in the documentary, they talk about, how he himself and everyone around him was kind of transformed by the process. So when we embark on creative work, we never know exactly where we're going to end up or how the process might change us. And I know you have a story about that.
Well, I'm thinking about like the alchemy of creativity. And I think we get drawn to projects because there's some growth that we want or we need, and that we resist, and that growth doesn't happen unless we actually go into the creative wilderness. That it's
Yes.
an essential step of the journey. And like you were saying, it's terrifying. And I feel like my artistic process is something that has saved my life because it has allowed me to get to know the really hard parts of myself in that way. And so I have two examples. One is thinking about when I was working on the memoir that I was writing when I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And I remember I was like my last semester, and I was writing a ton about childhood. And I remember just standing at the kitchen and crying and going, I have no idea who I am. Like this process to write memoir in some ways is to undo yourself so that you can remake
Yeah.
yourself whole.
Yes.
And then I also write fiction that's pretty close to the bone, as I call it. And I had written a book. Well, it iterated quite a bit, and I was working with an editor, and he's like, I think this book needs a different ending. And then I realized I had written a book that had the natural conclusion. It was a tremendous act of violence. And I was, how could I have written this? But it felt so right. And that because I was exploring the power and the legacy of violence. And so it would make sense that would be in the book, but I didn't want to write it because I didn't want to have to go there. So I took time away and I studied how other writers have done it. And after I wrote that ending, for me, this isn't for everyone, but for me, I stopped having nightmares about my dad. So it radically changed things. And then I was able to be with him when he died. And I don't think if I hadn't been through that alchemic process of the creative wilderness to kind of exorcise this thing that had kind of lived in the pulse of our family, I wouldn't have been able to have any peace to bring to him.
Yes. And I think that's particularly true with memoir, but so many creative works are somehow based on our life experience, our autobiography, if you will. I mean, how could it be otherwise? And I had the same experience with a client who was working on a memoir, and it was in her particular situation, it was like, this story can't be told. Right. It's like the things that happened in our family, we don't speak about it, so it was a real act of bravery for her to speak about it. And particularly, her remaining family members, very opposed to it. But, she went on this whole journey and, a lot of work that she did on herself in addition to her writing process. But at a certain point, once she had actually written the story of what happened from her experience, her perspective, she also stopped having nightmares about her father. And I've worked with a lot of people on memoir over the years, and I really liken it to emotional archaeology.
Absolutely.
Right? Like you have to dig down into yourself and like dust off those things that are often hard to look at and think about. And there's something, as you say, like sort of alchemical, very powerful about that process.
I also believe that a lot of people who are drawn to being an artist and whatever their medium is, sometimes they're coming from a legacy of artistry, but often there's an impulse to heal intergenerational stuff.
Yes.
And that's part of what that creative wilderness is, like facing what previous generations have been unable to face because they didn't have the resources or the means or the courage or the community that like we're drawn to. And that creative wilderness is essential to letting go of stuff so that it's not the thing that's shaping how we're making our choices.
And that's so powerful. I was just talking about this idea with a friend of mine the other day who's a psychotherapist, and she does a lot with internal family systems. And she was kind of explaining to me, that one of the kind of aims of that work is not just to sort of identify the different parts of yourself that might be wounded, and that's part of the process, but actually to kind of like the buck stops here with that, whatever the epigenetic sort of intergenerational trauma, that we can actually work with that energy and heal it or release it so that we don't have to continue to carry it, and we also don't have to pass it on. So that's incredibly profound. And I think one of the ways that we make meaning of our experiences and the way that we heal is through expressing these stories in our creative work, whatever that looks like. So it can be very healing, as well. And challenging, but and healing for ourselves and for others, right? Because how powerful is it to hear someone else's story and then you realize that you relate with it and that you're not alone in that experience, right? Or that there are other people out there that have experienced similar things. And yeah.
I'm supposed to say word.
Word. So, our creativity pro tip for this episode, we really want to gently but firmly encourage you to pay attention to that call to adventure. Is there an idea that maybe has been whispering to you in some way in your dreams, in your waking life, that you haven't answered the call yet? And really taking a step toward answering that call. And sometimes we resist it because we have some sense that we will be changed. And maybe our lives will be different for answering that call. We might have to shake things up a bit in our lives. And sometimes we're not ready for that, or we don't want to do that. And yet sometimes that's actually exactly what needs to happen. So, number one, paying attention to those little whispers, those little calls that come to us in the form of ideas or inspirations, and actually maybe taking the brave step to follow through and see where that might lead us.
Awesome.
So at Syncreate, we're here to support your creative endeavors. So if you have an idea for a project or a new venture, please reach out to us for one-on-one coaching or join our Syncreate 2024 coaching group starting in April. And we're offering a 10% discount on the coaching series if you mention that you heard about it through the podcast. So just reach out to us through our website.
You can find more information on our website, syncreate.org, where you can also find all of our podcast episodes. Find and connect with us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok, Syncreate. And we're now on Patreon as well. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review.
And we're recording today at our Chord ATX Studios in Austin, with Charlotte joining us from the Hudson Valley. The podcast is produced in collaboration with Mike Osborne at 14th Street Studios. Thanks so much for being with us, and see you next time.